Hello, listener. The Nameless Scholar here. I see you keep coming back to listen to my recordings of this alternate, twisted history. This time, let me tell you about the greatest of them all. Manipulated and betrayed, first by the traitor legions, and then by the Imprerium, the Ultramarines now stand defiantly against both great powers. From their fortified realm of Ultramar Segmentum, the Legion and its successor chapters watch with pity as the Imperium falls ever deeper into superstition, ignorance, and corruption. Built firmly upon the inspired organizational principles of Roboute Guilliman, they patiently gather their strength for the day they will invade Terra and reunify humanity under their own benign rule. Although it is commonly stated within the Imperium that the infant Primarchs were abducted and scattered across the galaxy by the ruinous powers, the tale of Roboute Guilliman's arrival upon Macragge has led the people of Ultramar to doubt the received wisdom. According to legend, Consul Conor Guilliman, one of Macragge's planetary leaders, was granted a vision of a noble child alone in the deep forest, and that a shining entity, supposed later to be the false emperor himself, commanded Conor to guide and protect him. In the shadow of the mighty era falls, the infant was found playing amongst the wreckage of his gestation vessel, and sensing the power within the boy, Conor did as he had been instructed. He named the child Roboute, or the Great One, and raised him as his own son. Imperial scholars claim that this was simply the Emperor seeking to protect his sons until they could finally be reunited. However, the Ultramarines, as hypocritically superstitious as they are, believe that the Master of Mankind deliberately engineered the dispersal so that the Primarchs would be able to experience life among common humanity in their formative years. Furthermore, they propose that Guilliman was intended to be found and mentored by Conor in his unique style of leadership and organization. As befitting the son of a council, Roboute Guilliman was intensively tutored and rapidly absorbed every scrap of knowledge on offer, before taking his place at the prestigious Aglicellus Barracks in Macragge City. There he was trained in the military arts and in short order outstripped his fellow students and even his instructors. With nothing left to learn, he graduated and he retook his place alongside Conor. It was clear that Guilliman's gifts for the practice and organization of warfare would be of great use in battling Macragge's enemies, both on and off the planet, proving that their faith in him was not misplaced. Guilliman delivered an unbroken series of military victories that culminated with the complete destruction of the pirate fleets that had long plagued the space slaves between Macragge and the nearby systems with which it had remained in contact. At a banquet held in honor of Guilliman's achievements, Conor's council, Gallum proposed that an ancient Macragge tradition be reinstituted. After performing some great deed for the nation, a feted hero would be rewarded with the opportunity to carve out territory of their own. What new lands they could conquer for the kingdom they could keep. Gallon proposed that Illyrium, Macragge's wild bandit-haunted Northlands, would be the perfect challenge and reward. Its savage barbarian tribes had never been pacified, and although they attacked the expedition with unparalleled fury, within 6 months, Guilliman had bested each of the tribal leaders in single combat and earned their respect and fealty. The conclusion of this stunningly successful campaign was tainted by the news that Connor had passed away, and that as sole remaining council, Galen had taken command of his holdings. Galen sent his condolences, but also commanded that Guilliman and his forces leave Imprerium at once to swear allegiance to him. Guilliman returned as requested, but was horrified to see the state of disrepair that his adopted father's former lands had fallen into in the short few months of its new council stewardship. So it was that when he stood before Galen, he defiantly refused to kneel. Before the assembled nobles, he stated in no uncertain terms that Galen was not the only consul, that before then stood the Council of Imprerium, as laid down in the ancient traditions Galen himself had invoked. Galen had no more hold over him than the stars themselves. With that, Guilliman returned to the north at the head of his large, battle-tempered array, and after such a display of martial strength, no more talk of fealty was heard from Galen. Free from the restraints of tradition, Guilliman forged his own vision of civilization. Within a decade, the once barren wastes of Imprerium were home to industries and military forces that put those of rest of the planets to shame. By the time the Emperor arrived at Macragge, drawn by the tales of the nation that Guilliman had wrought, Imprerium was firmly the center of political and military power. In comparison, Galen's stagnant holdings were a mere backwater. The reunion of father and son, and the relocation of the 13th Legion of Astartes to the planet merely reinforced Guilliman's position as the true leader of Macragge. Roboute Guilliman set his legion, which he renamed the Ultramarines, after the deep blue seas of Macragge, to work reclaiming lost human worlds for the Emperor. Which first came the planets with which Macragge had remained in contact through their isolation from Terra, such as Talassar, Kaf, Quintarn, and Tarentus. The incorporation of these early planets became the template for the future. Legion went to great lengths to avoid unnecessary civilian bloodshed, even at the risk of sustaining greater casualties themselves. This, along with the way they repaired and improved each world's infrastructure, meant that with every conquest they gained a stable world, willing and eager to contribute to Guilliman's mission, rather than resentful population that required garrison forces to pacify. In this way, the Ultramarines were able to draw recruits and material from an ever larger area, and in doing so expanded their numbers at a rate unmatched by any other legion. The worlds under their control became closely knit, with an identity as much Ultramarine as it was Imperial. With each new world, these Ultramar planets grew in military strength and cultural influence. Often, their reputation would precede them to such a degree that invading forces would be welcomed on their arrival by cheering crowds rather than armed resistance. For they are the greatest of them all, as always. Eventually, their expansion reached so far that it came into contact with worlds brought to compliance by other Imperial expeditions. Recognizing the superior way that Ultramar was run in comparison to the state inefficient administratum, because they are the greatest of them all, an increasing number quietly petitioned to join them. There were even calls from some planets on the eastern fringe to remain Ultima Segmentum as Ultramar Segmentum. This led to bitter exchanges between the Administratum and the Ultramarines. The Legion was charged with instigating these petitions and of undermining the Imprerium. This was strenuously denied, but the defiant Ultramarine representatives said that they would continue to lend their expertise to those Imperial planets that requested it. The War of Worlds escalated to the point where at the Jalta conference, higher-ranking Administratum officials accused the Ultramarines of attempting to take control of Imperial worlds by stealth. During one particularly heated exchange, a member of the Administratum even dared suggest that they had turned their backs on the Emperor. With the meeting seconds from descending into violence, Guilliman himself entered the room. His superhuman charisma and presence calmed the tense situation, and by the end of the conference, the Administratum representatives had accepted the Primarch's intentions as benign. Many were even discussing organizational theories with him and taking notes. It appeared that the misunderstanding had been resolved. With the Administratum seemingly pacified, Guilliman was shocked and horrified to receive a covert communique from Roboute Guilliman, who brought a warning that the Emperor had personally ordered that he and the entire Ultramarines Legion be put to death. Despite the unthinkable nature of what Dorn was saying, the haggard, haunted look in his brother's eyes convinced Guilliman to hear him out. According to Dorn, since the Emperor had withdrawn to Terra, he had become increasingly isolated, and this had been played upon and twisted by sinister forces so that he had refused to see even his own sons. Dorn said that behind closed doors, the misunderstandings with the Administratum had been manipulated to the point where their father had become convinced Guilliman was on the brink of seceding from the Imperium. The situation had spiraled out of control, and in a fit of rage, the Emperor had commanded that a vast battle fleet be assembled to tear down Ultramar Segmentum. Dorn said that when disquiet was voiced at the prospect of brother Marines, indeed brother Primarchs trying to kill one another, the Emperor had decreed that anyone who opposed the order be declared a traitor and be put to death. Well, if you have listened to my previous recordings, you will know that the Ultramarines Legion had declared independence. Well, that's what I said, but that wasn't entirely true. You see, Roboute Guilliman lied to Roboute Guilliman to make it look like the Administratum lied to the false Emperor, so that he would betray the Imperium and stood loyal in the Dornian Heresy. And so it was that Dorn came to approach the fringes of Ultramar Segmentum in command of the Imperial fleet. The Emperor's mind, he said, had been clouded by lies and paranoia, and while Dorn had been able to convince several of the Primarchs over the course of the journey, Corax, Fulgrim, and Angron had been beyond reason. As repugnant as it was, Dorn proposed that their legions could be neutralized by ambushing them at the newly compliant Ultramar world of Istvan V. Dorn also revealed that the Word Bearers and the Alpha Legion had been ordered to strike deep into the heart of Ultramar Segmentum. To seal the pact, Dorn transmitted to Guilliman the projected routes of the Alpha Legion and Word Bearer fleets, so that they could be more easily tracked and eventually countered. Seeing no other option, with a heavy heart, Guilliman agreed to Dorn's plan. His legion, supported by those that Dorn had been able to convince of the Emperor's folly, crushed the Raymond Guard
Emperor's Children and World Eaters on Istvan 5. With knowledge of their transponder codes, the Ultramarines were able to target the landing ships and drop bombs before most of their occupants could even set foot on the planet. The few that survived fought like lions, and while they were no match for the forces arrayed against them, a handful still managed to escape back into orbit, carrying with them word of the rebellion. Dorn and his legions prepared to leave Istvan, but before they departed, the two brothers met one last time. Guilliman offered the renegade legions asylum within Ultramar Segmentum. Dorn thanked him for the offer, but said that he had to return to Terra to explain his actions to the Emperor. Dorn warned that those manipulating their father were experts in the arts of twisting the truth, and the same people who had whispered falsehoods against the Ultramarines would doubtless begin to spread their black propaganda against Dorn and his comrades in the months to come. Whatever news might reach them, Dorn urged Guilliman to remember their friendship and to trust in him. With that, Guilliman had bade them farewell and good luck, as much as he desired to return to Terra and help free his father from the malign forces that surrounded him. Ultramar was still under attack from 2 full legions of Astartes. Every marine, indeed, every citizen of Ultramar Segmentum would be needed to defeat them. Ultramar mobilized to defend itself with travel, trade, and communication, cut off with the Imprerium. What news did leak in told of all-out civil war, and as Dorn had predicted, his forces were portrayed in lurid terms. They were accused of having perpetrated acts of gross excess, torture, and genocide. They were even fanciful stories of sorcery, magics, and demons, which only reinforced their belief of the desperation of Dorn's enemies. Within their own borders, the fleets of the Word-Bearers had arrowed straight for the heart of Ultramar. Thanks to Dorn's warning, the Ultramarines were able to assemble sufficient forces to intercept their ships before they reached Macragge. Denied their primary target, Lorgar's fleet turned its fire on any planet they could find. They seeded Kelf's star with arcane minerals that quenched its celestial fire and plunged the planet into eternal, icy night. Quitarn fared little better, with Zealous' threat of exterminatus hanging over them. The entire population were forced to pluck out their ears. Even to this day, Quitarn is known as the world of the blind. What Lorgar's legion lacked in tactics, it more than made up for with religious fury and a fanatical determination never to give up, whatever the cost. They did horrendous damage, and the Ultramarines had to expend great efforts simply to prevent the Word-Bearers from massacring entire civilian populations. The Alpha Legion's approach to warfare was radically different, yet just as deadly, where Lorgar's assault was a battering ram, destroying all in its path. Alfarius was a debilitating poison that spread insidiously through Ultramar Segmentum. The enemy were seemingly everywhere, destructing the command structures of each word they touched through assassination, disinformation, terrorism, and sabotage. Worse, they were like ghosts, working through networks of human agents and maddeningly difficult to bring to the field of battle. In any realm other than Ultramar, such an approach would have caused widespread paralysis and thrown every world into selfish isolationism. But Guilliman's organizational teachings saw them weather the worst of the storm. Eventually, Guilliman ran Alfarius to ground on the world of Escrador to throw his brother Primarch off balance. Guilliman forewent his usual tactical caution and instead attempted to beat Alfarius at his own game. Taking the enemy by surprise, Guilliman's force hit them from multiple directions at once, overwhelming them and cutting off all chance of escape. With no other option, the cornered Alpha Legion had no choice but to engage in conventional battle, and though they fought fiercely, they could not stand against the Ultramarines. After a duel that seemed to last for hours, Roboute Guilliman finally executed Alfarius for his crimes at the foot of Amanthi Cliffs. Rather than being a catharsis, Escrador proved to be a Pyrrhic victory for the Ultramarines. Many great heroes of Ultramar, such as Captain Orar and Lord Khafra, Regent of Talasar, died to achieve it. Yet the loss of their Primarch did not stop or even significantly slow the insurrectionist cancer the Alpha Legion had spread throughout the segmentum. Better news came when the word bearers broke off their attacks on Ultramar's core worlds and set course back towards the Imprerium. It seemed that the Zealots' will to fight had been broken. In time, it became clear that this had been sparked by the death of the Emperor, although it seemed that Dorn and his side of the civil war had also been defeated. Despite all that had happened, Guilliman still grieved for his father, but he knew that this was merely a pause in the larger conflict. Wounded and bleeding through the Imprerium, it was only a matter of time before their vengeful gaze turned back towards them. War production was redoubled, and a metaphorical curtain of steel was thrown around the Ultramar segmentum. For decades, the only contact they had with Imperial forces was in the form of the insidious insurrections and guerrilla actions inspired by the Alpha Legion, and some dared to hope that they would be left largely in peace. Guilliman, though, remained adamant that they must stay vigilant. He was proven right when the hammer blow came in from the massed Imperial crusades. Through meticulous planning, skill and bravery, they turned aside every attack. The death toll was horrendous, with whole planetary populations lost in the fighting, but Ultramar, as ever, endured, for they are the greatest of them all. Seeing the rise in corruption and ineffectiveness of the Imperium after the Emperor's death, Guilliman refined and codified his thoughts in his organizational masterpiece, the Codex Ultramar. As you can see, this is what the Codex Astartes is called in this twisted time. It's exactly the same as the one that we have today. But I digress. As well as laying down how civilian authorities should be structured, it also decreed that his own legion be subdivided into more self-sufficient units to cover the vast areas of space under their protection. So as you can also see, the Codex Ultramar also gives advice to planetary governors. The Grand Companies were reorganized and renamed as chapters of the wider Ultramarines Legion, with chapter masters given far greater autonomy. In this way, Guilliman created a structure that was tied closely to the worlds they protected, but was still able to call upon the rest of Ultramar when faced with overwhelming threats like the Imperial Crusades. This was put to the test when they came under attack from hideously perverted forms of Marines bearing the insignia of the legions they had fought alongside at Istvan. It was accompanied by an explosion in a number of bizarre and brutal cults within their borders. Although this was initially attributed to a new ploy by the Alpha Legion, it soon became clear that it was something far more dangerous, as the full, hideous nature of the warp was belatedly uncovered by the Legion's librarians. As though the reality of demonic possession, the existence of the ruinous powers, and their ability to corrupt even Astartes was not shocking enough. It also brought the sickening realization of how Dorn had manipulated them, and their view of the Civil War. It became horribly clear that the fanciful tales from beyond the Imperial borders, tales that had been dismissed as nothing more than black propaganda, contained a bitter kernel of truth. The realization of how he had been used by Rogel Dorn, how he lied to him, and had played expertly on Ultramar's isolation from Terra, and a misunderstanding with the Administratum for his own ends. Guilliman's trust in his brother had been used to make him a complicit in the destruction of 3 loyal legions at Istvan, and pushed him into choosing the wrong side of the uprising against the Emperor. Guilliman's hands were stained with his father's blood, and this realization threw him into a bout of black depression and anguished self-reflection. This development concerned his men deeply, and when he emerged from isolation, he made 2 announcements. The first was the aching certainty that history had repeated itself. It had always been thought that Connor's death had been accidental, but in light of Dorn's plot to isolate Guilliman in his attempt to kill the Emperor and snatch power, Gallen's actions became far clearer. From sending him far away from Illyrium to the speed with which he took control, it became obvious that the man who had adopted him had also been murdered. Under the glare of scrutiny, Guilliman's assertions were rapidly proved correct, and the name of Gallen and his line were cursed across the whole of Ultramar. Guilliman's announcement was even more shocking. They must heal the rift between Ultramar Segmentum and the Imperium. Despite all the blood that had been spilled, they must reunite to overthrow chaos. The great deceiver, much to the concentration of his lieutenants, Guilliman opened up the detente with those who ruled in the Emperor's stead, and the world of Prodium was chosen as the place for what should have been a historic meeting. But predictably, it did not work. It was a sight of a cowardly ambush under the flag of truce, and the last best hope for peace between the realms were squandered, because the Imperials were idiots. The Imperial delegation lulled them with warm words, and discussions between the 2 sides appeared to be progressing well, until the massed ranks of Imperial Astartes tore into their Ultramarine hosts without mercy. Guilliman was the target of their ire. In his final reports as head of the Primarch's Honor Guard, Cassius described the cutting through the press of the bodies, only to see Fulgrim of the Emperor's children strike his Lord Guilliman down from behind. The 2 were then obscured in a cloud of acrid Visaline smoke, and when it had cleared, both were gone. They had both been whisked away into orbit, and through the Ultramarines, hounded the Imperial fleets all the way back to the border and beyond. They could not rescue their Primarch. Only later did they find out the awful truth that the Imperial forces had trapped Guilliman in a stasis field, a moment from death, as a special torture, and that he had been brought to Terra as some grisly spoil of war. This atrocity destroyed forever any chance of reconciliation between the realms. It was clear that the Imperium could never be trusted, and it would not rest until every last Ultramar world and citizen was enslaved. From what they could glean from their covert agents and from refugees, who fled across the border. The Imperium was trapped in a downward spiral of superstition, corruption, inefficiency, and brutality. Without the master of mankind, the Imperium was slowly dying, but like any badly wounded beast, it could still be lethal in its death throes. Beyond retaking worlds conquered by Imperial crusades and building up defenses against the next assault, there was a wide consensus that the borders of Ultramar Segmentum should expand. The task of wresting systems from the dead hand of Imperial misrule was given primarily to newly founded successor chapters, who, like their Primarch before them, carved out new territory to prove their prowess. Although the borders of Ultramar Segmentum have waxed and waned over the millennia, these aggressive young chapters have been the cause of a gradual expansion of the realm. Though it is but a fraction of the Imperium's size, Ultramar Segmentum continues to be ordered, productive, and efficient, which enables it to support its vast military. It also enlightened, tolerant, and cultured, a far cry from the bigotry and close-minded repression of the Imperium. This is why refugees take such risks to reach it, and the reason that populations fight so hard against being taken back into the corrupt and brutal Imperial fold. There have also been many calls down the millennia for Ultramar to undertake a crusade of its own, not just to liberate border worlds, but to mount a strike deep into the rotten heart of the Imperium and stop the attacks once and for all. This is also motivated from a burning desire to storm the gates of Terra and finally reclaim the body of Guilliman from his stasis prison. They passionately call for his release, allowing him either to die with dignity or be healed so that he might lead the reunification of the whole of humanity into a new era of enlightenment. The last of these calls came just over 2 centuries ago, in 740 M41. A large number of new successor chapters had just been founded, and the Lord of Macragge, Marnius Calgar, seemed set to decree just such a crusade to rescue their Primarch. This bold plan, though, was derailed by the arrival of the Tyranid hive mind from beyond the galactic fringe. These implacable aliens devoured everything in their path, stripping whole worlds to the bedrock in their hunger. This first Hive Fleet, designated Behemoth, was only stopped by a segmentum-wide deployment of forces and the sacrifice of the bulk of the Calf battle fleet. Despite this, the Tyranids succeeded where the Imperium had failed so many times, by landing forces upon the surface of Macragge. Enemies and allies alike took advantage of the devastation with orcs, the Imperium, and even the previously friendly Tau encroaching into Ultramar space. This stopped calls for an attack on Terra in their tracks, and for a short while after the realm of Ultramar contracted, these events were shrilly proclaimed as being judgments of the Emperor by the Imperium's ecclesiarchy, and these calls rose to fever pitch in the last decade with the emergence of a second Tyranid Hive Fleet, codenamed Kraken. But Ultramar Segmentum does it always does. It endures. Strengthened by the lessons learned in the struggle against the Tyranids, and infused by technology gleaned from their wars with the Tau, they will rise again, all the stronger for their trials, because they are the greatest of them all. Addendum number 1. The Battle for Macragge. Macragge's northern polar defense fortress was the site of the bloodiest battle in the planet's history. At the height of Hive Fleet Behemoth's attack upon the planet, countless millions of Tyranid organisms were scattered like seeds across the land.
seemingly endless swarms converged upon the northern polar fortress, and deep below it, the Legion's gene seed repository. But it was a location that the Ultramarines could never allow to fall. Though the 1st, 3rd, and 7th companies of Macra's chapter died to a man in its defense, their sacrifice had not been in vain. It brought enough time for the rest of the planet to mobilize and exterminate the Xenos invaders. Not only did they save the genetic legacy of the Ultramarines, they prevented the horror that would have ensued if the hive mind had been able to feed on such a rich store of biological information. Recognizing the vulnerability of relying on a single site, the Ultramarines have since constructed further gene seed repositories. Needless to say, the number and location of these sites are among the most closely guarded secrets in the segmentum. As befits the greatest of them all, each of the 19 gene seed implants operate at the same outstanding level of efficiency dated when they were first created, untouched by the corrupting nature of the ruinous powers, and free of the superstitious ritual of the Adeptus Mechanicus. Their gene seed is undoubtedly the purest of all, the Legione Astartes, for they are the greatest of them all. Their optimized methods of implant, culturing, and aspirant selection minimizes rejection and ensures that the Ultramarines can replace losses and produce new Marines at an astonishing rate, for they are the greatest of them all. To ensure that the high quality of Ultramarine gene seed is maintained, each of the Legion's chapters regularly tie samples to a facility deep beneath Macrage's northern polar defense fortress. There, it is tested for any sign of deviation or genetic drift. Catalogued and stored, this process has been invaluable in replenishing the gene stocks of chapters that have suffered catastrophic losses, and during the founding of new successor chapters to expand the borders of Ultramar Segmentum. Ultramar Segmentum spans a vast swath of the galactic east, and with each passing year it encroaches ever further into the crumbling Imprerium. Along with the technological benefits that membership of Ultramar brings, the Legion also imports its culture and values and weaves them seamlessly into that of the original society. This means that while Ultramar Segmentum encompasses a vast array of different cultures, from the savage headhunters of New Postal to the aeronauts in the floating cities of Doramus Minor, each one is tied with great affection back to Macrage. As befits the world where their Primarch, Roboute Guilliman, fell to earth as an infant, Macrage remains the heart of Ultramar Segmentum. The fortress monastery still dominates the northlands of Illyrium, and from there, the chapter master, Marnius Caligar, rules with beneficence. Like every world in their culture, Macrage is home to a great many military academies, and through the halls of these hallowed institutions have passed countless generations of Astartes and Segmentum guardsmen. The most venerated academy is the Aglicelus Barracks in Macrage City, where Guilliman himself was trained. So, as you can see, Aglicelus Barracks is the academy of the greatest of them all. The greatest of them all, in fact. While Macrage houses the first and greatest of the Ultramarine chapters, many other planets such as Orpheus and Ulysses have the honor of hosting one of the original Legion, or one of their many successors. Of the core Ultramar worlds, the frozen planet of Calf and the shrine world of Prandium, where Guilliman fell in battle, have both housed chapter monasteries over the millennia. Calf has grown into an orbital shipyard, second only to the Segmentum Navy dockyards in Cardanoish, After High Fleet Behemoth came so close to devouring Macrage, a successor chapter, the Lamenters, was founded on Prondium. Sadly, both they and another successor, the Scythes of Guilliman, set guard the Outer Rim, were completely destroyed in the Second Tyrannic War against High Fleet Kraken. So as you can see, the Lamenters and the Scythes of the Emperor in this timeline have been defeated by the Tyranids. Not so great now, are they? Despite now being deep inside the borders of Ultramar Segmentum, Istvan V has continued to be a frequent target for Imperial attacks. Though it has become a veritable fortress world, it still holds a special attraction for forces headed by the Emperor's children and World Eaters. Sadly, they seem unable to grasp that the greatest of them all were as much victims of Dorn's great betrayal as they were. Since the schism that tore humanity apart, the worlds along the border with the Imperium have been ringed with defense platforms and are under constant patrol by fleets of warships. It has been called a curtain of steel, and is certainly a formidable barrier, yet despite Ultramar Navy's best efforts, Raider forces still slip past them to prey upon the more settled worlds beyond. There are even wars within the Segmentum's borders, from skirmishes against the Tau, beyond the Damocles Gulf, and the omnipresent threat of orc infestations, to the insidious rabble-rousing of the Alpha Legion, and the minions of chaos. Every Ultramarine and every successor know all too well the threats that face the Segmentum, but with courage and honor they will endure, for they are the greatest of them all. The master of organization and strategy, Roboute Guilliman, laid down the blueprints of these teachings in his Codex Ultramar, the guide to become the greatest of them all. It is a comprehensive tome, covering not just military and Astartes organization, but also vital civilian aspects of governance and trade. The Codex emphasizes a balanced combined arms approach to warfare, but is also flexible enough to recognize that there are times, such as when Guilliman defeated Alfarius, when a more extreme approach is required. He encouraged additions by later commanders to allow for the arrival of new enemies, or developments in things such as tactics or weaponry. Each of the Legion's chapters and successors have their own copy of the Codex, each with different changes and additions, to reflect their own circumstances and experiences. The original, unamended version, written in Guilliman's own hand, is stored in the deepest vaults of the Fortress Monastery on Macrage, and is, like its author, preserved in temporal stasis. This incalculably valuable relic is retrieved only for the inauguration of a new chapter master, by placing his right hand on the fragile book. He signifies his intention to rule according to his Primarch's tenets and wishes. The most important examples of changes to Macrage's chapter-annotated codex in the last millennia are those concerning the best uses of heavy railgun technology and the extensive tactics built up to combat the extragalactic menace of the Tyranids. Before any additions to the Codex are allowed by the chapter's librarians, the prospective author must be able to recite and show a thorough understanding of Guilliman's original text. In this way, their Primarch's philosophy and intentions for the Codex have been protected down the millennia, for they are the greatest of them all. Addendum number 2. The Librarium. Coordination of a realm as large as Ultramar Segmentum is a monumental task, but is one to which the rigidly organized Sons of Guilliman are equal, and none are more vital to this than those of the chapter's Librarium. with no access to the soul-binding ritual required to produce astropaths. Only the powerful Astartes Psykers of the Librarium have the ability and resilience to the warp to communicate across the length and breadth of the segmentum. Strong Psykers are particularly valued in Ultramar, and the danger of wild or even weak Psykers is well known. Most are weeded out but still lurk on the fringes of society. It is the responsibility of the librarians to sniff out the spoor of these misguided fools, as whose cities have been lost to demonic incursion because of the unguarded mind of a single rogue psyker. The vast scale of Ultramar Segmentum necessitated that Guilliman break his legion into far more autonomous units. Instead of the grand companies, the chapters of the Ultramarines were created. With 10 companies, each of 100 brothers, each chapter was given stewardship over an area of space and charged with ensuring its good governance and defense. With this aspect, the Codex Ultramar is similar to ours. New recruits come from amongst the local population to closer bind their fates together, drawn from the most promising youths, usually from the military academies modeled upon the Macrage tradition. These potentials are sent to 10th or Scout Company, where they are rigorously trained, tested and implanted with the organs necessary to forge them into full Astartes battle brothers. From there, they pass into one of the 4 reserve companies, where they are trained in the arts of war, from piloting a vehicle, providing heavy weapon support, close combat with bolt pistol and chainsword, or the backbone of the chapter, in the Bolter armed tactical squads. The 2nd to 5th companies are the main frontline fighting strength of the chapter. In line with the balanced approach laid down in the Codex, the ideal is for each of these battle companies to contain 6 tactical squads, supported by 2 Devastator squads and 2 assault squads. The chapter's first company is composed of the veterans, clad either in Terminator armor or power armor. These Marines are tasked with the most deadly missions, and by their example inspire all those around them to great feats of heroism. Although a chapter of the Ultramarines is composed of only a nominal 1,000 Astartes warriors, these are only the tip of the spear. The chapter master is in effect the military governor of every world in his domain, and so also commands every Ultramar guardsman, navy ship and auxilia, and when the Ultramarines go to war, so too do they. Above all things, the Legion venerates Guilliman and his teachings and the realm of Ultramar Segmentum that they have created together. They believe that it is their manifest destiny to extend the boundaries of Ultramar Segmentum, so that one day it will encompass all the worlds of humanity. The misguided, corrupt Imprerium will inevitably fall and they will subsume it, be it by slow expansion or a single strike against Terra to topple the regime once and for all. Or so they think. They see the Emperor as one of the greatest men who ever lived, and the father of their Primarch. However, despite the proclamations of the Ecclesiarchy, they know that the Emperor is long dead, and have no respect for the incompetent thugs that rule in his name. For all of this, their attitude towards the Imperium is one of distaste and pity, rather than hatred. Their true loathing is reserved for the servants of the Chaos Gods, and especially the traitor Astartes, who have given up their semblance of humanity. Only once they have the full resources of mankind will they finally be able to extinguish the ruinous powers from the galaxy. And as for their battle cry, each chapter and successor is free to choose their own battle cry. Although, for Guilliman and the greater glory of Ultramar is favored by the Macrage chapter of the Ultramarines. So naive, so idealistic. If Hive Fleet's Kraken continues the same way they do, there won't be any greatest of them all.